Bosnia-Herzegovina is perhaps known best for being one of the only majority Muslim countries in Europe. Tensions stemming from this distinction have had significant real-world consequences in recent history, contributing to the deaths of over 100,000 people in the 1990s. Even with this demographic oddity, describing Bosnia-Herzegovina as just a Muslim country would be a rash oversimplification. The Bosnian identity contains aspects of a pagan people who became Christians that then embraced Islam and the interfaith tolerance and sectarian violence that followed those transitions. Having said that though, today Bosnian Muslims take pride in their Islamic heritage, which began with the illustrious Ottomans. Long considered a stronghold of Ottoman authority, Bosnians struggled to assert their right to self-determination throughout the 20th century. After a deadly conflict where they literally had to fight for their lives, Bosnia-Herzegovina emerged from the embers of the Bosnian War, allowing it to remain the last bastion of Islam in Europe. Join me today in an exploration of Bosnian identity as I explain the timeline and complexities of Bosnia-Herzegovina's relationship with Islam. Bosnia emerged as a small polity in the early Middle Ages. The first Bosnians were likely some combination of South Slavic groups like Serbs and Croats, and not a distinct ethnic identity. The distinction was not just nominal though, as regional contemporaries noted the polity as being independent from other groups of similar ancestry. These southern Slavs began converting from traditional paganism to Christianity in the 9th century AD, with Serbs ultimately opting for Eastern Orthodoxy and Croats preferring Roman Catholicism. But neither denomination secured a commanding foothold in Bosnia. Instead, the local Bosnians formed the Bosnian Church, an entirely separate Christian sect. Both the Pope and Orthodox patriarchs detested the Bosnian Church, regarded it as heretical and promoting dualism. Rome would even launch multiple crusade attempts against it. Modern scholars have largely rejected the accusations of the Bosnian Church as dualist as Catholic propaganda, and it is unknown if this so-called church even had any organizational structure whatsoever. Regardless, the constant Catholic attacks weakened the faith's influence drastically by the 15th century. With no clear-cut favored denomination, this provided fertile ground for another religion, like Islam, to spread uninhibitedly. It was precisely these circumstances that allowed the Ottoman Empire to take advantage of this vulnerability in Bosnia to leave an irrevocable impact on identity in the Balkans. Turkish forays into Bosnian territory began in the late 14th century, typically functioning as raids while the main armies concentrated on what remained of the Byzantine Empire. After multiple sieges across decades, the Muslim Turks captured Constantinople in 1453, making it their own capital for the next 500 years. Having established governance within a significant portion of Bosnia 2 years prior, it would be entirely under Ottoman rule by 1483. Even during the early stages of Ottoman rule, the relationship between Christians in Bosnia and Islam was never especially contentious. Orthodox Christians and Catholics were still vying for supremacy in much of the region, and some folk beliefs held by Bosnian Christians supposedly translated more naturally to Islamic than Christian worship. Early Ottomans interacted heavily with mystical Islam, namely Sufism. Also, divisions within Bosnian secular politics were just as significant as divisions within Christianity. It is disingenuous to present a conflict between the Christian Bosnians, even when including the caveat of internal divisions, and the Muslim Turks, because Bosnian notables had for decades sought support from the Ottoman sultans in feuds against each other, even when sharing the same Christian denomination. A power struggle in 1413 saw Hrvoje Vukčić align himself with the Ottomans against fellow member of the Bosnian Church, Sandali Hranić. Hranic, who was a proud adherent to Bosnian Christianity, had also already built, broken and rebuilt multiple alliances with the Turks by 1413. He would continue to do so for years. Needless to say, Bosnians did not fear Islam. Similarities in theology also contributed to the willingness of Bosnian Christians to convert to Islam. The aforementioned folk beliefs held by many Bosnian Christians, though frowned upon by Catholicism and Orthodoxy, were often encouraged by Muslim Sufi orders with influence in the Ottoman court. The dancing Mevlevi dervishes in particular were quite successful missionaries in Bosnia. The dervishes were steadfast in their belief that acts of faith should be done privately and without pomp or circumstance, which may have resonated among the disparate and persecuted Christian factions within Bosnia. The aspect of prayer via dance may have been especially attractive to Bosnians due to its similarity to the cleansing rituals of Bogomilism, a neo-Gnostic and dualist sect of Christianity that was popular in the medieval Balkans. Contributing even more to the Mevlevi's popularity was their reputation as unfailingly compassionate towards Christians, no doubt making Islam a palatable option. Islam also provided material and social advantages to Bosnians that could not be found in Christianity. Though Christians were a protected class in the Ottoman Empire, they were not entirely equal citizens, in the sense that only men of Islam could reach the most influential classes in the Ottoman government. Furthermore, in exchange for their status as a protected minority, Christian subjects of the Ottomans were compelled to pay the jizya, an additional tax that was not levied upon Muslim members of the empire. Considering Islamization progressed much more rapidly among urban Bosnians than rural peasants, many must have believed Christianity was not worth the cost. A majority of Bosnians had embraced Islam by the 17th century, forming a cultural and ethnic identity that was now distinct from Serbs and Croats. This majority would swell even further in reaction to the omnipresent conflict between the Ottoman Empire and Habsburg Austria. The many wars between the two powers left both drained and badly beaten and resulted in numerous territorial swaps. Bosnia, not initially at the extreme periphery of the Ottoman domain, saw the inflation of its Muslim population as the Turkish inability to match European technological development resulted in the Ottomans losing some of their European territories. Muslims living in Croatia, Hungary, Slovenia, and other areas formerly within Ottoman control fled to Bosnia as the Austrians gained ground. Then, in 1878, the rechristened Empire of Austria-Hungary invaded the Ottoman-controlled regions of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Muslim Bosnians and Orthodox Serbs offered fierce resistance but were unable to repel the invasion. For the first time in almost exactly 400 years, Bosnia-Herzegovina fell under the control of Christian Europe. The Austro-Hungarian occupation precipitated thousands of Bosnian Muslims, by this point sometimes going by the term Bosniak, fleeing Bosnia-Herzegovina out of fear of religious persecution. The Austro-Hungarians did not actively pursue vindictive policies towards Bosniaks, but downplayed the religious difference of Muslim and Christian locals in the hopes of forming a new Bosnian psyche that was loyal to Austria-Hungary. The idea failed spectacularly. Members of different faiths tended to form their own groups to represent their interests. The idea of one nation representing one people did greatly fascinate many of the inhabitants in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but Austria-Hungary was never part of that equation. In the summer of 1914, the heir apparent to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was shockingly assassinated in Sarajevo by Bosnian Serb Gavrilo Princip. This would prove to be the catalyst for World War I. At the end of the Great War, Austria-Hungary was on the losing side and thereby dissolved as a state, leading to the formation of an independent kingdom of Yugoslavia in 1918. Though the Yugoslav state presented itself as a nation where all the South Slavs were equals, that often did not reflect reality. Originally, the only ethnic groups considered to be constitutive peoples of Yugoslavia were Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Muslims were relegated to a minority group without fully guaranteed rights, and the identifier of Bosniak was not included in the census at all. The Ustazi, the Nazi puppet regime that ruled Yugoslavia with a Catholic fascist syncretic ideology, played upon this discontent by promising equal status to Bosnian Muslims in hopes they would assist in the regime's genocide of Serbs. Some Muslims joined the Ustazi and few actively opposed it. However, a majority of Bosniaks were indifferent towards the fascist regime, and this indifference turned resentful when assurances of Muslims in influential political positions remained unfulfilled. Mass rejection of the Ustazi could also perhaps offer fascinating insight into how Bosniaks at the time weighed their identities as Slavs with their identities as Muslims. The Bosnian national identity became even more complicated after the end of the Second World War, upon which many Bosniaks had to reconcile their devotion to Islam with their allegiance to the new communist regime in Yugoslavia. Over 3,000 Muslims were active in Josip Broz Tito's communist partisans by 1944, when the militants possessed total momentum. Tito presided over Yugoslavia's post-war communist regime, balancing the diametric ideologies of communism and Islamic theology relatively well. Though the Communist Party frequently and pointedly criticized Islamic customs as sexist, it was also under the regime that Muslims were finally made a constituent nationality of Yugoslavia, thus making them legal equals in society. Yet the wording of Muslim instead of Bosnian Muslim sparked debate. Was the majority Islamic Bosnia a republic of the Muslims, or were Muslims merely Yugoslav nationals who also practiced Islam? Bosniaks tended to identify with the former option, retorting to the disapproving Croats and Serbs that they had already had their own designated homelands. The situation was not without tension, but it was kept steadily intact by the firm and effective leadership of Tito. The situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina devolved into violent ethno-religious conflict with the declaration of independence in March 1992, only 12 years after Tito's death. The remnants of Yugoslavia, by now effectively limited to ethnic Serbs, including those within Bosnian and Croatian borders, then invaded Bosnia-Herzegovina and put Sarajevo under siege in what would quickly become a fully fledged war. Bosniaks and ethnic Croats initially joined forces in resisting the Serbian advance, but the tense arrangement disintegrated in October. For roughly the next 18 months, the conflict occurred primarily on ethnic lines with three main belligerents: Croats, Serbs, and Bosniaks. Modern Bosnian identity, particularly in its relation to religion and ethnicity, solidified during the Bosnian War. Both hostile and neutral European nations let Islamophobia shape their approaches. The Republika Srpska, the government formed by Bosnian Serbs who allied with the Serbian government of Yugoslavia, conducted multiple atrocities against Bosniak civilians, with the Srebrenica massacre in 1995 later found to have constituted genocide. According to American President Bill Clinton, the opposition of the United Nations Security Council to lift the arms embargo crippling the Bosnian war effort may have been based less on humanitarianism and more on the belief of Western members that an independent Bosnia would be unnatural as the only Muslim nation in Europe. French President François Mitterrand, in particular, was particularly unflinching and adamant in his belief that Bosnia did not belong. Muslim nations, on the other hand, ultimately provided the biggest support to Bosnia-Herzegovina. Iranian and Pakistani operations that smuggled ammunition, arms, and missiles to Bosnian forces were essential for the defense of Sarajevo. Saudi Arabia provided funds and volunteers. State-funded and non-state Islamic fundamentalist groups also assisted the Bosnian government, though it is debated how effective they were and to what extent cooperation existed. Regardless, it is indisputable that support from external Muslim individuals and entities was invaluable to the isolated Bosnian military until March 1994, when Croats and Bosniaks in Washington, D.C. agreed to a ceasefire and remade their combined alliance against the Serbs. With momentum shifting, a NATO-targeted bombing campaign in late summer 1995 definitively forced the Serbian government to negotiate. The subsequent Dayton Accords, agreed on 21st November 1995, established the existing framework of Bosnia-Herzegovina, one state divided into two main federal entities, each containing a majority Bosniak and a majority Serbian population respectively. In 3.5 years, the war had killed 100,000 people, at least 63,000 of them being Bosniaks. In its wake emerged an independent Bosnia-Herzegovina and uncertainty. To the majority of people living in Bosnia-Herzegovina today, Islam is only one facet of how they view themselves and the world. A poll conducted by the United Nations Development Programme in 2007, 12 years after the conclusion of the bloody Bosnian War, revealed that an overwhelming majority of Bosnians identified as Bosnian nationals before any religious affiliation. Even so, most residents expressed deep dissatisfaction with the current state of Bosnia-Herzegovinian affairs and were not optimistic about the future. Similarly, a paper published in 2020 using data from 2013 reported intense grievances from all Bosnian peoples regarding the country's social situation, as well as the 1995 Dayton Accords that established it. Despite that, Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats all preferred upholding the agreement when asked if they would support the Accords in a hypothetical future referendum. What is the Bosnian identity then? When one considers the shifting alliances of Sandali Hranic and Hrvoje Vukcic, the internal divisions that remain within Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the bizarrely functional relationship among its constituent ethnic groups, there is certainly something to be said about the ability of Bosnians to consider the ideas of people who are not like them. Thank you guys for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for always supporting. If you want to financially support Hikmah History, there's a link to my Patreon in the description to this video. Until next time, peace!